Welcome back to Bookkast, Bestsellers in Minutes. Ever feel like you're really into a book, but just don't have the time to actually, finish it?
Yeah,
That's where we come in.
that's right.
This time, we're diving deep into Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen.
Ooh, good one.
It's all about how our own thinking can actually be the root of our suffering,
Yeah.
and more importantly, what we can do about it.
It's so fascinating how Nguyen takes this idea, which could easily get lost in all that abstract philosophy,
Right.
but he makes it so relatable.
Yeah.
He uses everyday examples and stories from his clients, even ancient parables, to really drive the point home.
I love that.
You'll find yourself nodding along,
Totally.
recognizing your own patterns
Absolutely.
in these stories.
Yeah, so let's unpack this whole thinking creates suffering idea.
Okay.
One of the first things that struck me was the distinction the book makes between thoughts and thinking.
Right. It's not about eliminating thoughts altogether.
Right.
I mean, that would be impossible. Instead, it's about recognizing that thoughts themselves are neutral. They're like raw energy, constantly flowing.
Okay.
The potential for creativity.
Okay.
It's when we engage in that thinking that things get messy.
So it's like the difference between having a thought like, I'd love to learn to play guitar,
Yeah.
versus the mental spiral of, do I have time? What if I'm not musically talented? Will I look silly?
Exactly.
It's that second part, the overthinking, that just sucks the joy out of that initial spark.
Exactly. And Nguyen even has this experiment in the book
Oh, really?
where he asks you to think about how much money you want to make.
Okay.
That first number that pops into your head,
Yeah.
it's usually exciting, right? But then the thinking mind jumps in
Oh, yeah.
with all the doubts, fears, comparisons, and
Mm.
suddenly that initial excitement just feels heavy and stressful.
Ugh, I totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed how sometimes when you're feeling really joyful and peaceful, it's almost like you're not thinking at all? Like the joy is just there without any mental chatter.
Yeah.
This is where Nguyen introduces those three principles,
Yes.
which I have to admit at first sounded a bit, out there.
I get that term like universal mind
Yeah.
can sound a little woo-woo.
Right.
But when you break it down, it's actually a really grounded concept.
Okay.
Think of it as the intelligence behind everything in the universe,
Okay.
from the way a flower grows to the laws of physics.
So it's not about a specific being or a deity,
Right.
but more like the underlying energy or
Yeah.
force that drives all of creation.
Precisely. And then there's consciousness,
Ah.
which is simply our ability to be aware of our own existence, to experience anything at all. It's what allows us to perceive those thoughts flowing from the universal mind.
Okay, so the third principle is thought itself,
Yes.
the raw material we use to shape our experiences.
Exactly.
So are you saying that by overthinking, by getting caught up in our own limited perspective, we're actually blocking ourselves from tapping into that universal mind,
Yeah.
that source of well-being and creativity?
That's the core idea here.
Okay.
We get so used to relying on our own thinking, our own judgments and analysis, that we forget to trust that deeper intelligence, that natural flow of life. We end up creating our own suffering by resisting what is.
Okay, but how do you actually stop thinking?
Well,
Seriously, have you ever tried to just shut your brain off?
yeah.
It's like trying to hold back a tidal wave.
The book acknowledges that you can't completely stop the process of thinking.
Right.
Thoughts will always arise.
Right.
It's more about changing our relationship to them.
Okay.
Recognizing that we don't have to get swept away by every single thought that comes along.
Okay, so that's where the analogy of the murky water comes in, right?
Exactly.
We let the glass sit still, and eventually the sediment settles, the water becomes clear. We can do the same with our minds. Create that stillness where thoughts can settle and we can see things more clearly.
Exactly. And there's that other powerful analogy that Nguyen uses,
Okay.
the quicksand metaphor.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever felt yourself getting sucked into a spiral of negative thoughts, and the more you struggle,
Oh, yeah.
the worse it gets?
Absolutely. It's like quicksand.
Yeah,
The more you fight, the deeper you sink.
exactly.
The key is to stop struggling and allow yourself to float.
And that's where mindfulness practices like meditation can be so helpful.
Yeah.
They train us to simply observe our thoughts without judgment, to let them come and go without getting hooked.
But wait, if we're not supposed to overthink things, does that mean we have to give up on having goals and ambitions?
Not at all. It's not about becoming passive or aimless. In fact, the book argues that the source of our goals is what really matters. Have you ever felt like you were chasing a goal out of fear or a sense of lack? Like, if I don't achieve this, then I'm a failure.
Ugh, all the time. Like those goals that feel heavy, driven by a need to prove something.
Yeah.
Or escape a situation.
Exactly. Nguyen calls those desperation goals.
Okay.
They come from a place of scarcity, a belief that we're not enough as we are.
Right.
And even if we achieve them, it often feels like a hollow victory because that underlying sense of lack is still there.
So what's the alternative?
Yeah.
Are there like good goals?
Yeah.
Goals that don't make us miserable?
Yes. He calls them inspiration goals.
Okay.
These are goals that feel light and expansive, that come from a place of genuine passion and excitement. They're not about escaping something, but about creating something new, something that brings you joy in the process, not just in the outcome.
That makes so much sense. It's like the difference between forcing yourself to go to the gym because you hate how you look in a swimsuit versus going because you genuinely love how it makes you feel.
Yes, and think about it. Haven't you noticed that when you're pursuing something that truly inspires you, it doesn't feel like work?
Right.
It feels like flow. Like you're in alignment with something bigger than yourself.
I'm starting to see how this all ties back to those 3 principles. When we're connected to that universal mind, when we're trusting the natural flow of things,
Right.
our goals and desires start to align with that energy. We're not forcing, we're flowing.
Exactly. It's like we become a channel for that creative energy to express itself through us.
There's another really insightful section in the book about unconditional love.
Oh, yeah?
It's not just about romantic love,
Right.
but about how we approach all our relationships and even creative endeavors.
Yes. Nguyen shares this really personal story about realizing that his girlfriend loved him unconditionally.
Oh,
She couldn't explain why. She just did.
wow.
But he realized that his love for her was initially conditional, based on specific reasons.
It's like she loved him for who he was,
Yeah.
simply because he existed.
Exactly.
Whereas he had this mental checklist of qualities she needed to possess to be worthy of his love.
Right.
It's a profound realization.
And he applies this same concept to creative work. When we create from a place of unconditional love, without expectations or attachments to the outcome,
Yeah.
we experience a much deeper sense of fulfillment. It's about the joy of creation itself, not about external validation or success.
I can see how that would be incredibly liberating. It takes the pressure off, allows you to be more playful and experimental.
And you know, this all sounds really amazing, but I imagine some people listening might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great in theory,
Right.
but how do I actually put it into practice? How do I shift from overthinking to trusting my intuition, from desperation goals to inspiration goals?
Right. It can feel daunting to let go of that illusion of control that our thinking minds provide. But Nguyen offers some practical advice.
Yeah.
For example, he talks about the importance of creating space for miracles.
He uses these fascinating examples from history. Did you know that Thomas Edison used to take these steel ball naps?
Steel ball naps. I have to admit, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Apparently, when he was working on a particularly challenging problem, he'd sit in his chair holding a steel ball in each hand.
Right.
As he drifted off to sleep, the balls would slip from his grasp and clang to the floor, waking him up.
Oh, wow.
And often the solution would just pop into his head in that moment between sleep and wakefulness.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like he was using sleep as a way to access a different level of consciousness, to bypass the overthinking mind.
Exactly. It's about creating space for those aha moments, for those intuitive insights to emerge.
He also talks about Einstein's habit of playing the violin when he hit a mental block.
Yes.
It's about stepping away from the thinking mind and allowing something else to take over.
Right.
So we don't necessarily need steel balls.
Right.
But maybe we need to be more intentional about creating space for those non-thinking moments in our lives.
Yeah.
Whether it's through meditation, spending time in nature, or even just taking a few minutes to disconnect from technology and be fully present with our breath.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing when we're already in that non-thinking mode. Have you ever noticed how when you're fully absorbed in something you love, time seems to disappear?
Oh, for sure. Like when you're lost in a good book or deeply engaged in a creative project, you're not thinking about the past or the future. You're just completely present in the moment.
Exactly. That sense of flow, of effortless focus, that's a sign that you're tapping into that deeper intelligence, that universal mind. The book even provides frameworks for designing your environment to support these non-thinking states. It's
Yeah.
about creating the conditions for well-being to flourish naturally.
This is all so inspiring, but I have to admit, I'm also feeling a bit intimidated. It's like,
Yeah.
what if I try all of this
Yeah.
and I still can't shake off that nagging voice of doubt and overthinking?
Right.
What if I'm just wired to be a worrier?
It's okay to feel that way. Remember, this is a practice, not a destination. You're not going to become a perfectly enlightened being overnight.
Right.
There will be times when you fall back into old patterns when you get caught up in the quicksand.
So how do we deal with those moments? Do we just beat ourselves up for not being good enough at this whole non-thinking thing?
The key is to approach it with self-compassion. Notice those patterns without judgment, and then gently redirect your attention back to the present moment. Remember those analogies we talked about? The murky water settling, floating in the quicksand? It's not about forcing, it's about allowing.
This is starting to make a lot of sense. It's not about eliminating thinking altogether,
Mm.
but about recognizing when it's helpful and when it's just creating unnecessary suffering. It's about learning to trust that deeper intelligence, that intuition that guides us when we get out of our own way.
And it's important to remember that this deep dive has just scratched the surface of what Don't Believe Everything You Think explores. If this resonates with you, I highly encourage you to read the book and dive deeper into the practical tools and techniques Nguyen offers.
Yeah, but before we wrap up, there's one part of the book that really stuck with me.
Okay.
Nguyen asks this thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
Have you ever regretted not following a gut feeling?
That's such a powerful question. It makes you stop and think about all those times we've ignored our intuition, that inner whisper, and then later wish we had listened. It's like we have this internal compass, but we've been conditioned to rely on logic or external validation instead.
I know, I've definitely been there. You talk yourself out of something that feels right because it doesn't make sense on paper or because someone else tells you it's a bad idea.
It's like we've learned to distrust our own wisdom. But the more we learn about how the mind works, the more we realize that those gut feelings are often our most reliable guide.
So how do we start trusting that inner voice again, especially when we've been so conditioned to ignore it?
It's about recognizing that intuition speaks a different language than our thinking mind. It's not about logic or analysis. It's about feeling, about those subtle nudges and insights that come from a deeper place.
So it's about paying attention to those subtle cues, those flashes of knowing that come through, even when we can't explain them rationally.
Exactly. It's about learning to discern the difference between the voice of fear, which often masquerades as logic, and the voice of intuition, which speaks in a quieter, more subtle tone.
Nguyen actually provides some practical tips for cultivating that intuition in the book. He talks about creating a miracle space, a time and place dedicated to connecting with that deeper wisdom.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be as simple as taking a few minutes each morning to sit in silence, meditate, or journal. It's about creating that stillness where those intuitive insights can surface.
It's almost like we need to give ourselves permission to be receptive to those whispers of guidance rather than trying to force or control the process.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about surrendering to something bigger than ourselves, trusting that we're being guided even when we can't see the whole path laid out before us.
Don't believe everything you think has given us so much to think about, or maybe to unthink about. It's a powerful reminder that we have more control over our experience than we realize, and that true peace and joy are available to us when we learn to quiet the mind and listen to the wisdom within.
It's been a pleasure diving deep into these ideas with you. And remember, this conversation is just a starting point. I encourage you to explore the book further and discover how these concepts can transform your own life.
Absolutely. And that's Don't Believe Everything You Think on Bookkast Bestsellers in minutes. Before you go, we want to leave you with one final thought inspired by the book. If you could create something purely for the joy of it, with no expectation of reward or recognition, what would it be? Let that question guide you as you move through your day. What brings you a sense of aliveness, of effortless flow? What whispers to you from that place of inspiration and unconditional love? Maybe it's time to start listening.